there, and thank you in advance for watching this. What we're about to go into are a series of artist talks as part of a series that we had launched as our form of participation for the Fall of Freedom initiative. JTR Presents is a contemporary art museum that offers design services that helps the creative community, helps the community in general, and we seek to positively impact our community and environment through art, tech, and design. So, in relation to this initiative, Fall of Freedom, it started off with 16 artists that did a call to action about 6 weeks ago. And the call was for anybody in the arts to do something, be it in their programming, a project, something for the 22nd and 21st of November of this year, as a way for us as a creative community to push back and call out the current administration and their actions against creative institutions relating to censorship, justice, community truth, and freedom of expression. This is our community's way of saying that we will not be silenced, we will not be censored. We will still continue to fight for justice for all. We'll still continue to fight for freedom for all. And we stand by our communities, especially those that are marginalized. In addition to that, we exercise our freedom of expression. We exercise our First Amendment rights in really pushing back and holding our government accountable. And so with that said, we will be moving on, and I present to you the following artists. So, Miss Archia, first and foremost, thank you so very much for your time, patience, and just for your willingness to be in this conversation. So, as a quick recap, this is part of the Fall of Freedom campaign movement that's going nationwide as a response to what's going on with our government and our current administration. And its involvement in cutting funding for the arts, as you may well know. It is also just something to reflect on the idea of freedom and around the themes of censorship, injustice, truth-telling, and freedom of expression. And so when I thought about what artists to do this virtual talk series with, you definitely came up to mind, because since our involvement with the Black Creative Revival during the pandemic, I think that's where we met. And then just learning more about your work that we'll get into in a minute, I kind of actually want to start there as the landing point with particularly with public art practice, and just even with your current work as you work with local government. So, but if appropriate, obviously. And so I guess in all that you do professionally and even personally for your narrative as an artist, how do these themes inform you, how you move in this world, and how does your work address those themes?
Yeah. Well, I think from its inception, in terms of my own personal art practice, the DNA of it for me is an emancipatory project for myself. So I had spent, decades doing communications work and sharing other people's stories and other people's voices. And I had a desire to share what was inside of me. And so for the way that I approached the work, this was my time to take all of the experiences that I'd had and invite them to animate my hand in painting. And so it didn't occur to me to even look at anything. I wasn't trying to necessarily directly reference the outside world. And so as my own art practice has evolved, I do have, a realistic drawing practice, representational, but it's still not the core, and it's still at the core of it as well is the invitation to liberate myself, right? And the invitation to that I extend to others, to do the same. And so for me, it's in the DNA and of my work and how I approach the work. And one of my favorite quotes from an artist was from Thornton Dial, who said, "My art is the evidence of my freedom." So the ability to make what I want, how I want, that's just part of the DNA of why I do what I do. And I
That's
also it just evolved into my practice.
mm-hmm.
As it evolved, I started to work in different places, including the coffee shop, that I
Mm-hmm.
was owner of, and I had my studio there.
Right.
And
People's perk,
so
right?
People's Perk. So
Mm-hmm.
it taught me a lot about who I am as an artist and how I preferred making with and amongst people. And I had my studio there so I could paint in between customers, working with customers. And it also just, it, it showed me how much my practice is about being with others, and that we make each other, and that I can make anywhere. That's another thing I can make anywhere. And so this sort of vision of the artist in the studio by themselves alone, I never had a strong interest to be that artist. There's some of that happens in terms of alone time, but my preference is to work with people and work in community. Um, and so for me, once I closed the shop, I went on retreat to 2 monasteries, and spending time in contemplation and silence was where, for me, the desire to do public art practice was born, and to just take my practice somewhere where I was with and amongst people. And at that time, I just chose the co-op, the cooperative, Deep Roots, and just started to make. I didn't ask anybody's permission. I just went there and started to make, and I invited people to make with me. And for me, that was part of the liberating and emancipatory project, to invite people to make with me, was saying, you have a creative spirit, and I want to hold space for you to express that spirit however you like. And I would bring tools and invite people to make with me. So I'll stop there, pause there for a little bit.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
thank you for that. I think there's much to play with here, because so there's a couple of things that come to mind. There, as you said, made the work that you make as an emancipatory process, and that it seems to be reliant on community. And so the freshest thought that's on my mind is collaboration with community being itself a form of resistance. Would you
Mhm.
agree with that? What are your thoughts on that?
Collaboration itself being a resistance. Um,
Collaboration with community
community,
specifically.
community being a resistance. Yeah, I mean, I think anything can be used as a tool of resistance. I think history has taught us that silence can be a form of resistance. It doesn't have to be like anything you do can be a form of resistance. It's about context. Um, I would say. I think in an individualistic society,
Yeah.
saying that I insist that I want to collaborate in community, yes, I think can be a form of resistance. Um,
Okay.
it's it's I think if the goal is just ego fulfillment, then saying no, I equalize myself with others, that everyone is an artist and has a creative spirit, and I believe in holding space for that as well, I think could be seen as resistance. It's funny. I think that sometimes I struggle with these words having been called by others, maybe sometimes a revolutionary, and I don't always know what that means because I'm just being myself. so so
Fair enough. Yeah.
but but I think once again context matters, and once again I think it, being authentic and being heart driven, it can be a form of resistance, like being saying you're going to
Mm.
resist
Hmm.
what may be man-made death culture, like you're going to resist that and
Mm.
try to be heart-led. I think could be a form of resistance, and I've seen that in, I think, a number of people that I have read about and admired over the years, like Peace
Hmm.
Pilgrim. Peace Pilgrim.
Not
She was
familiar
someone
with.
who just, she decided to just walk and talk to people about peace, and she wore a T-shirt that said Peace Pilgrim on it, and
Mm.
she just essentially that became her life, and she just ate what was given to her, and sometimes slept where, she slept wherever. This was her journey, and so this idea of maybe walking and wandering, when people say you're supposed to, have goals, and you're supposed to be striving to climb the ladder, that this idea of wanting to simply be and to just walk with, walk with purpose. I considered that, I considered what she did revolutionary, because it wasn't a seeking of material gain. Um, she just said, I want to talk to people about peace, and that's what I'm going to do.
So that makes me think about, because a lot of my work is focused with like identity. And a big part of that's because so much of the world seems to respond from that, but not just your identity, but the identity that it also tries to label on you. So, kind of backtracking a little bit to what you're saying about sometimes folks refer to you as a revolutionary, and you're like, I'm just being me. I do think it's important to name that and acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are intentionally choosing resistance or intentionally being a revolutionary, what does that look like for you personally, especially in our current climate?
Ooh, that's a good question. What does that look like? I think for me, it looks like prioritizing joy. It looks like understanding the cycle of things. I think we're in a cycle. A lot of what we're experiencing, I think, are symptoms of something deeper, not necessarily new. I think they look like um, feeling a sense of personal empowerment and moving with that, as opposed to succumbing to fears that may be shapeless, or a product of anxiety, of anxious times. I think that when we, if you have a sense of eternal time and a sense of an eternal spirit, it, I think, letting that drive you can be a form of resistance as opposed to being reactionary.
I appreciate that. And I think that goes kind of hand in hand in some ways when you're working with community. At least that was my first impression of you when we got to work together. And so, now my mind is kind of drifting on this topic about like, from your experience, what is community, or what is being in community with people like look like, and like how do you maintain that? Because
Mm.
I think that's an important ingredient to a lot of the work that folks are trying to do for any kind of change.
Well, I would say, well, fundamentally, and I think I touched on this a little bit, understanding that we're all equal, and that at our essence, we're all the same
Oh yeah.
perfect spiritual energy. We are all,
Yes.
I I deal with someone totally differently if I am holding in mind and heart that at your essence, you are perfect spiritual energy. Like,
Mm.
that's one way. I think with that's like what I would call a capital T truth.
Mm-hmm.
And the small and with the small T truths of people's lives, which I would say are more like maybe your particular identity, what you've experienced in your life. It's about taking people where they're at. And so that to me is, I think, can be a struggle, but just being able to accept and take people where they're at as opposed to laying on them where they're supposed to be or how they're supposed to be. um, I feel like it's a more compassionate and liberating approach, and it's something I still struggle with. It's all a practice. When I said public art, like when it's a practice, I'm still practicing. And so I think being in community means you're always practicing. You're never getting it perfectly. Just give that up. Imperfection is the only choice. It's the only choice.
In a weird way, I find that to be liberating in and of itself.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
feel like you touched on it a little bit when you were talking about this freedom to express. And even though you've been classically trained for like other different styles, it sounds like for you to choose the style that and even with your work, there's a freedom I see in exploration in just mark making.
Hmm.
And that I think is also a form of liberation and resistance in the sense of for those who have gone through art school and were like taught the proper way, which has its own sort of inherent biases, we'll say. And
And
because I
trauma.
think that was
I hear some people talk about trauma too from going through art
trauma.
school.
Actually, yeah, I see that. Oh
Mhm.
God, I see that. Going through two art schools, yes, I see that. Um, and I think that was some of our liberation work too when we first met. One of the conversations was, well, what does constitute as professional art or good artwork, and what roots are those in? So I think that's also important to kind of name. I wanted to because you were talking about capital T truth, and it reminded me of the last collaboration in the portrait that you recently got. In your journal entry, you had mentioned about I capital K know I am doing when I don't small K know what I'm doing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I kind of before I move on, like I feel like that resonates with what you're kind of talking about with folks
Hmm.
living in their truth. Can you speak a little more on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm so glad that you made those two connections because they are related in terms of capital T and small T truth and capital K and small K. Because I think
Hmm.
there's sometimes we can get caught up in our planning, or we get caught up in feeling like, oh, I need to know what's next, or a sense of certainty, or maybe even particular technical details of something. But
Yeah.
when you capital K know, when you know, okay, I am inviting you into a process where we are equal as people, as artists. Like when you go with that, regardless of the particulars, I think
Mhm.
that's gonna, when you move that way, I think that's gonna take you where you need to go. And I
Mm.
think so, to me, it's sometimes we can get caught up in these details or in this planning, and sometimes it is just about moving through, like just moving through something. So I think sometimes I may not know when, I may not know how, but I know. And so and I'm a quote, that's a quote from T.S. Madison. By the way.
Thank you for the references. Yes.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. No,
Like,
and
yeah.
yes.
No, I was gonna say that's like, so this, you may not know how, you may not know when, but you know what, and you know kind of where you're headed, and you also
Mm,
know why. Um,
hmm.
and I think that makes a difference in, like, as well. I had another mentor asked me in terms of when I was in a point of transition after I closed the shop, she's told me, I want you to pay exquisite attention. And that's another thing that I think is part of walking your path, like paying exquisite attention to like what you're doing, who you're doing it with, why you're doing it. You'll see things when you're paying attention that you need to see. And things start to align as opposed to, oh, I've got to do all this networking because I've got to go out and see people. Well, no, you don't necessarily need to see everyone, but there, if you pay attention, there are people who come through your path that are aligned with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, because like
Yeah.
there's certain things that kind of are resonating with me, reflecting on my own career, like creative journey so far, and what you're saying. I see it both within me, but also within other artists and other activists and the work that they're doing. Even today, I was talking to a curator and she had mentioned about the importance of, because I was asking her about bias in the work that I do in research and curatorial studies. And she was saying, like, nobody, first of all, nobody's without bias. Everyone has bias.
Right.
And if someone tells you they don't have bias, that's a red flag. Well, in her
Yes.
argument, that was a red flag, and it's frankly mine too. Yeah, and so it has me rethinking this lesson of like owning where you stand, depending on what you're talking about. Of course, grounded in truth, have the facts that like back up your claim, or at least something that defines why you're on it. But
Mhm.
it makes me wonder about owning, like just being transparent about the views that which you come from.
Mhm.
Um, and so, and I think there's a good segue about like responsibility, because this reminds me, and the reason I was kind of caught up in that was I was thinking there's something my mentor in undergrad had given, he like drilled it into all of our heads about, as artists are image makers, designers are image makers, and both impact society in their own respective ways. And so with whatever we made, he always asked, like, how are you going to take responsibility for what you make? And I took it a little too personal to heart. But needless to say, it's something I think through with everything I do. So to you, I ask, do you feel a sense of responsibility, or how does responsibility show up as you walk in this space creatively and just in your world as a person?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the ways it shows up is that I've got to engage in a process of self-reflection about the things that I do and why I'm doing them. Because I was talking with some students earlier this year, and I was like, when you work with people in a leadership capacity, and say I'm working with someone like, are you like, my goal is for people to be successful. That's my goal. And so that's my responsibility to them. And so being self-reflective about why, if I'm asking someone to do something, like, why am I asking them to do this? Like, or am I trying to exercise a sense of control, or am I trying to help make them successful? So that's part of the responsibility to me in terms of
Mm,
being in community or working with people, and especially being in a leadership capacity, that
mhm,
what are your intentions, and being
mhm,
self-reflective about that,
mhm,
because that to me is like working to help make people successful. It means to me that, like, I see what their strengths are and I name them. And I think
mhm,
people, I I set the intention years ago to look for people's magic. And that is when you can see, when you're looking to see what people are good at and they're successful at, and really looking for their magic.
mhm,
I think that is a response. That's one of the ways that my
mhm,
sense of responsibility to people comes up, um, as opposed
mhm,
to the criticism, this idea of being critical or tearing people down, or like I don't, it's like, no, what are you, oh, is this a way maybe you need some more support?
Mm,
And I'll do that, like, I can support you in
yeah,
that way. But that doesn't diminish a person's strengths.
I see.
And looking for what people do well and cultivating that and naming that, I think is something really important. And it's a responsive that to me is part of how I understand myself to be responsible to other people, and also just to be self-reflective. And so if I feel like, no, I was really impatient with you the other day, like that's not really, but that was me being tired or something, like just that to me, being self-reflecting on your own behavior, I think is really, really important. um because I
Yeah.
think yeah, it 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 helps me help other people better. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's because a lot of times I think about responsibility in terms of consequences,
Mm-hmm.
and do I need to take accountability for them?
Mm-hmm.
Even consequences that I don't foresee coming, whether with what I do or say, because the truth
Right.
is what we do and say does ripple out into the world in ways we probably won't be able to fathom.
Right.
Not all of
Has impacts. Yeah, has it impacts things in ways that you can't always foresee.
Yeah,
uh,
but it sounds like even that you take to a personal level rather than trying to encompass all of it. And that like there's something liberating in that of itself too.
well, I mean, it gives me, I feel like I've watched people sometime in conversation that they put things in the abstract, and I think sometimes that can be disempowering. Sometimes, not always, because but if you like abstract out something, it's kind of nameless, you can't grab. Whereas if you can pull, sometimes if I can pull it in and I can really feel like it gives me a sense of self-efficacy to be able to say, oh, okay, I see how I'm in this dynamic, and I can maybe switch it. Like, oh yeah, if I do this, it might have this effect. Like bringing it back to because that's also what I have control over. I think it works against a feeling of empowerment and emancipation. If you think nothing is within your control, it's all out there. Everything's out there. Everything's being done to me. Everything is out, like that. To me, is like,
Hmm.
okay, let's pull it back. Let's pull it back in, because I think that
Mm,
where you have some, the locus of control, they call it.
the locus of control. Okay.
It's like, and it's because it's like, sometimes when I hear people say, well, I can't do this, and I'm like, okay, you can't, like you don't have the ability, or you won't. You're making a choice.
Right. Right.
you know
Yeah. Yeah, there's a therapist I've been watching on YouTube. I think he goes by like Dr. Ryan Mick, and like a lot of his family therapy methods, he heavily relies on that narrative of like take note of accountability. What can or can't you do? Is it that you can't, or is it that you won't? And that is a choice, and why? Like why, and why is that your choice? Because there's something under that. I think that ties a little bit into like your like
yeah.
you recognizing your why when you are intentionally doing emancipatory work, or taking conscious actions of resistance. And in a way, I even think somehow that takes agency back in your hands, even with identity.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. um
Yeah.
doesn't, and let's be clear, it doesn't remove systemic problems. Like it doesn't uh
Right.
yeah, it doesn't um remove systemic problem. um and it doesn't all, oh, sorry, I had a call coming in. All right, am I
Uh-oh.
still with you?
Yeah, you're still with me.
Okay. sorry, the screen, the call popped up and you went away and I was like,
You're
uh-oh,
good.
send a voicemail. Thank you.
It's
It
all
doesn't,
good.
yeah, it doesn't negate that there are systemic issues. It just means that regardless of the system, you always have choice. And I'm a person who doesn't use words like never and always. But
Mm.
like you always have choice. And I feel like for me, um a book I read, Long Walk to Freedom, Nelson Mandela's autobiography.
Okay.
And
Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom.
it was just something, it's always stuck with me because I feel like um I'll never lose hope after reading a story of a man who went from 27 years of solitary confinement to president of his country. Like that to me, and reading about him, you talk about accountability and self-reflection. He
Oh yeah.
said, he said, I was not a good father to my own children. Was never there. But I I felt a responsibility to be father of a nation.
Mm.
So I think he's it's all wrapped up, in one, and he's able to take accountability for not being a good father to his own children, at the same time understanding that there was work that he felt compelled to do. And I think that's pretty, to me, I hope I'm able to do the same, to acknowledge all that, to be
Mm.
able to acknowledge. um,
I think, and I think you're doing, from what I've seen you do, I think you're on the great path doing that. Because I think about you leveraging the access that you have to help others, accessing places of privilege that you take space in to help others that don't. And I see that in your day-to-day job. I see that with your public art practice. I see that with just your background in administration, back when, again, when we did Black Creators Revival. So my only two thoughts are how to I actually have to credit you because this next question, and we kind of talked about responsibility a little bit, but when
mhm.
we did that when you invited me to do the artist talk with William H. Johnson's work, particularly of FDR in the UN, earlier this month, the question you asked was, are we obligated to leverage our access and privilege? And if so, how? Um, and I would add, if not, why? And so, in honor of that, I'm using the same question, but for you in this context, especially in relation to any of the themes of censorship, truth telling, freedom of expression, or addressing injustices through the creative industries and the creative practice.
Wow. Wow. So I'm trying to find the entry point maybe into what I want to say about, like, why wouldn't you use privilege to help other people if you find yourself in a position with that ability to open doors for others, to build bridges? Like, to me, why wouldn't you do that? Like, I just,
Mhm.
you know, I find that,
Mhm.
uh,
If it helps, maybe we can use that as a starting point, as a back and forth.
yeah, yeah. And I
Okay.
think for me, yeah, I feel like, you know, I have to be fair. I got to give my parents some credit.
Okay.
Yeah, like, I have to give them some credit because that's what I saw them do. My mother had what she called her adopted daughters, and
Yeah.
there were women that she mentored, and they would come for Thanksgiving dinner maybe, but there was just always, she had three daughters of her own, but she just, both of my parents, like, had this way of moving in the world that was about like, well, community and um, helping people have access to things, helping people. Um, I mean, my father, it wasn't so much about making a dollar, but were you helping everybody in your community make a dollar? Like that's just kind of how
Mm,
he lived. They lived, and that's why I say I have to credit some of them, and I hope that in some ways, that I honor that legacy, and I honor that. I mean, because they brought me into the world and nurtured me to be who I am. So I think that sort of fundamental, like watching my
mm,
parents, was like, that's what you did in the world.
mm.
Like, that's what
Yeah,
you were supposed to do is um,
yeah,
go out in the world and try and be a good person. Like that was like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, and I should clarify, right? Because, like you said, context is everything. And this kind of brings me back to our conversation about Johnson's work about inner worlds, outer worlds, collectivism versus individualism. And in a very individualist society, I have encountered counter arguments of this mentality of I worked hard to get mine, or I had to put in the work and I got here. And if I can do it, so can you. And we both have our own views on that.
Like, I'm like,
Yeah, yeah. But
nobody gets, nobody
go
gets
ahead.
anywhere. Nobody gets anywhere alone. I mean, come
Yeah,
on. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And a more earnest argument that has gotten me a little taking the other argument a little more seriously is this relationship of the community that comes and helps the individual
Right.
is not some of that because of the individual of what that individual carries. And then what makes me think this is kind of a loop or a cycle, it's like, well, part of the individual also is a product of the community.
Yep.
So
Yep.
just kind of like you as an individual informed by how your parents were in their relationship with community and how the community was with them. And now you as an individual are giving back and the community is giving back to you. And
Mhm.
so it just has me rethinking the relationship of those two concepts. I used to think they were very opposed, but now
Mhm.
I'm thinking they come in ebbs and flow. It goes back to kind of what Mama Love had mentioned with needing to take time to care for yourself and resting and like sometimes I need to take care of me and then set those boundaries so you can keep giving. In the community, if they're really supportive, will respond to that. So I guess for me personally, there's a little bit of maturity going in it, but I think it's relevant to this conversation as people are figuring out what to do in the midst of things, right? And I know for me, I tend to be action oriented. Like, what are we going to do about a thing?
Mhm.
And so my last thoughts are kind of just that, aside from protesting and donations, what are the other ways can creatives like continue this fight for our collective freedoms and our individual privileges?
That's a big question. I mean, I've said that I say this. I've said this before. Keep showing up for yourself.
Mm,
Keep showing up for yourself and being obedient to the creative journey. Like to me,
mm,
that is something that's really important. And fight for it. Fight for it. And I
yeah,
feel like I'm talking to myself a little bit, as well as we're talking. So I think having a sense of commitment to continue to show up for yourself and to show up for others. um, for us to ask for help when we need it. There's an honor there is an honor that people that we have when we give to each other. You know, like there are times when when you've been able to help a friend, and you feel like it gives you a sense of purpose and feeling needed. So we have to continue to seek out each other's help and support. Um, and I think I feel like, and we're different generations. I won't necessarily say how much older I am than you are.
That is fair.
But
Age
I
is
will
just a
say
number. We know
this.
that.
But well, I'm going for ageless. So
Listen, see, that's why I want to be like you when I grow up.
I'm going for ageless.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I would say, yes, stay alert, pay attention, show up for each other, look for where people are gathering who are like-minded, and also know that these are cycles. Just know that. And
Okay.
that nothing we have history to help us. We have this is a site we have each other. I think we need to continue to, as artists, bring the innovation and creativity and voice. Um, if you feel like you don't know what to say, go find someone else's voice who does and amplify that.
Mm, that's beautiful.
So
That's beautiful. Yeah.
me, yeah, I think that there's a number of ways of you continuing to care for yourself and be solid and good in who you are, and feeling good about what you do. I think is it's I think it's like rest is resistance. You
Yes.
know, that when we choose not to treat ourselves like machines and treat each other like machines,
Right.
that's something that I think is part of the emancipatory project, and attitude. And like I said, just know things are imperfect.
Yeah.
Don't,
So
don't beat yourself up. Things are imperfect.
that is refreshing to consider, and also, my last thoughts actually as you were talking, and again, the relationship between the individual and the collective, right? Do you think that's applicable in a collective sense, specifically within the arts, or do you think the arts can play a particular art and design, to be fair, the creative industries, if you will, um, have to play a particular role to amplify these fights?
Play a particular role. Hmm.
Yeah, I guess
Well,
another way is how can they amplify their role
I mean,
in these fights?
I don't think I would say there's anything new. I feel like they've always played a role in, like, um, to me, access, like making sure that everyone understands themselves as having access to a creativity. Like, it's fundamental to who you are. It's fundamental to who we are that you have access to creativity, and that um, giving it a sense of everydayness, the artfulness of every day. Like, I think that's important. I think feeling like you can use whatever's around you. You don't have to have any rarefied, you know, tools. You can pick up anything. You can make a mark, and it can be beautiful. Like, you can, and also inviting more people. Wherever you think art doesn't belong, take it there. Like, I think that's and the fact that it can speak truths, and it can speak to us in a way that's stimulating. I mean, I've heard a poet talk about presenting poetry, and one this the guy watched him, said, "Man, I don't know what you said, but I know something was happening." He said, "I didn't understand, but I know." So people don't have to, like, know at this intellectual level. They can know at an embodied level. They will feel it. We'll
That
feel it. So
That's
continue to
beautiful.
honor your feelings,
Yes.
your feelings, and and bringing the body, bringing the body to the art in a variety of ways, an embodied experience, because that's all what we're doing. We're spirits and running around these bodies. And if you're the type of person like me, who believes that we're all sort of one part of one greater spirit,
Mm,
like continuing to connect to that, I think it's going
mm.
to lead us in ways that are fruitful.
I
So
really appreciate that. And that inspires me to continue this. And again, I just thank you so much for this.
you're welcome.
Yeah.
It's a
So,
pleasure.
of course, of course. So I think that covers everything. Again, thank you so much. Let
Mhm.
me end recording. So yeah,
I
just a
let me
segue.
yes,
Yeah, go for it.
let me say, I'm gonna say it, um that your artist talk, your creators talk for transparency, where you said, why are people so fixated on bodies rather than who someone is telling you who they are? Like, what is, I was like, yes, like that was so important, and it stuck with me. And it was like, yes, that why are we so fixated on body parts rather than who someone is telling you they are?
I
That to me,
really,
yeah,
yeah.
that
No,
was
I appreciate you sharing that, right? In this conversation about responsibility. And like again, we we don't know what the things we do and say are going to fully like what's going to come out of that. And kind of what you mentioned before about responsibility kind of on a personal level, that feels more tangible than trying to think of all the possible outcomes of the things you do. And so I thank you for sharing that, because that it was completely different from what I was impacting, but yet it was aligned with what I was trying to do, which was use art to platform the voices of the historically unheard. And I think that also relates to what we're doing here in our creative practice. And so thank you for sharing that.
and it's a good reminder too. I think generally that's why I say to people, show up for yourself and keep doing what you do, because you never know who's listening, and you never know
Mm,
how you're going to impact someone. You may think in our when we're alone, or we may wonder, you know, what are we important? Are we impactful? And the answer is yes, because somebody's always listening, and you just never know who you're going to touch. You never know that. So that's an important reason to keep doing what you're doing. Okay.
Thank you so much for watching. That was such a fun conversation. Before we go, I want to update you on a few things. First of all, JTR Presents just launched an artist resource map. This map is intended to centralize information regarding the resources that can be equipment, venue spaces, exhibition spaces, residency programs, or other funding for artists to continue their creative practice and for our voices to still be heard and our stories to still be told. Secondly, there are other resources relating to voting. Your representation and your voice does matter, especially in the upcoming elections. You can find more information somewhere around this video. It's probably at the bottom in the description, but please, please, please get out and vote and make sure you're represented. Third, please donate to your local artist organizations or any art organizations that resonate with you. A lot of times us artists and creatives rely on organizations like the National Endowment of the Arts or our regional or art council that often offer funding for our programs, or funding for programs for other organizations, or offer funding for us artists to continue our work through residencies, or just giving us the money directly. So donate to those institutions so they can continue to empower us to do the work that we're doing. And then lastly, I just want to let you know that your life, your voice, and your money matter, and they make a big difference, even if it's something small. Thank you again. Hope to see you soon.